Amina never liked drawing attention to herself. She enjoyed simple things, quiet days, and routines that made her feel grounded. Every week she went with her husband Saeed to the conservatory where he was learning piano. She always sat in the back corner, the same chair by the tall window, where the sun made soft patterns on the floor. She kept her hands busy with a little bit of knitting or sometimes a book she had already read many times. It was her way of passing the time as Saeed practiced. The people at the conservatory barely noticed her. Students hurried past her without even looking. Instructors greeted Saeed warmly, but they only nodded politely in her direction. She never took it personally. She knew she was just a quiet companion sitting in the background, someone who did not belong to their musical world. The conservatory building itself was beautiful in an old-fashioned way. When you stepped inside, the echo of piano notes floated through the hall like soft waves. The walls had pictures of famous musicians who once studied there. Students carried sheet music under their arms, rushing between practice rooms. Some played scales loudly, some repeated small passages again and again. It was a place full of ambition and dreams. Amina watched all this from her corner seat, but she never imagined herself as part of that world. She felt comfortable on the outside, observing quietly. She liked watching Saeed learn because he enjoyed every moment of it. He was not trying to be a performer or impress anyone. He simply loved the feeling of touching the keys and hearing music rise from his efforts. Their life outside the conservatory was simple and peaceful. They lived in a modest apartment not too far from the center of the city. Amina spent her mornings preparing meals, watering her small collection of plants, and doing small chores around the house. She always kept things neat and calm. Saeed worked at a small office during the day, and in the evenings, he would tell her about new pieces he was practicing. Amina would listen with a warm smile even when she did not fully understand the technical parts. She never talked about her own past, not because she wanted to hide something, but because she had quietly closed that chapter long ago. Even Saeed knew only little bits. He knew she had once taken music lessons when she was younger, but nothing more than that. Every time he asked, she would simply say, it was long ago. What people around her didn't know, what even Saeed didn't know, was that music had once been the biggest part of her life. But now she carried that memory like a distant sound she could barely hear. She told herself she had moved on. She believed it. That day at the conservatory seemed like any other. A cool breeze came through the open window, carrying the faint scent of the garden outside. Amina sat in her spot as usual while Saeed prepared for his lesson. The room was filled with the soft buzz of conversation among the students. Some were complaining about difficult pieces. Some were excited about an upcoming event. A few joked loudly with each other. Amina listened quietly, smiling a little whenever someone played a beautiful line. She always admired the passion of the young students even if she felt like she didn't belong among them. To her, music was something she had loved deeply once, but had gently put away like an old letter. Inside the classroom, Saeed practiced with his instructor. Amina occasionally glanced up to watch. She admired how patient he was, how much he wanted to improve. The instructor corrected him, sometimes with a strict tone but also with encouragement. Amina could see Saeed's determination through the glass panel in the door. She didn't know that everything would change that day. She didn't know that her quiet presence in the back seat would soon draw every pair of eyes in the building. She didn't know that the past she had buried so gently would come back to life, in a moment she never expected. While she waited, she let her mind drift. She remembered small things she tried not to think about: hands on piano keys, long hours of practice, the feeling of losing herself in music. But she pushed the memories aside, telling herself they belonged to a different time. As Saeed continued his practice, Amina felt a strange mix of peace and tension. She didn't understand why. Maybe it was the weather. Maybe she was tired. Or maybe something deep inside her sensed that life was quietly preparing a surprise. Saeed finally came out of the room, holding his wrist and looking troubled. Amina straightened up. She could tell something was wrong even before he spoke. He explained that he had hurt his wrist earlier that morning while lifting a heavy box at home. The pain had been mild at first, so he ignored it. But during practice, it suddenly worsened. She could see how disappointed he was. She gently touched his arm and asked if he was okay. He nodded, trying to act strong, but she knew how much he cared about his assessment later that week. They went to speak with the instructors about the situation. The instructors gathered near the front of the room, discussing the upcoming assessments. When Saeed explained his injury, they exchanged uneasy glances. One of them said that the assessment required him to play his assigned piece. Without it, they could not mark his progress. Saeed tried to reason with them, asking if he could postpone it, but they said the schedule was fixed. One instructor, who often joked a little too much, suddenly looked at Amina. He gave a small laugh and said something like, "Well, she comes here every week. Maybe she can play it for you." The room grew quiet for a second. The joke wasn't mean, but it carried a hint of disbelief, like asking someone who observed cooking to suddenly prepare a complicated dish. Amina felt all eyes turned toward her. She froze for a moment. She didn't want to be laughed at, but she also didn't want Saeed to fail. She looked at her husband's worried face, and something inside her shifted. It was a quiet feeling, almost like a whisper. Before she could think about it too much, she nodded. "I can try," she said softly. A few students raised their eyebrows. Someone let out a small giggle, not in a cruel way but in disbelief. Even Saeed looked shocked. He had never seen her touch a piano. "Are you sure?" Saeed whispered. She didn't know why she said yes. She didn't know if she could still play. All she knew was that she wanted to help him. The instructors exchanged looks, half amused, half curious. No one expected anything serious to happen. They thought she might tap a few keys and give up. Amina walked slowly toward the large piano in the center of the room. Her heart pounded. The polished surface reflected the bright lights above. She placed her hand on the bench, feeling the smooth wooden edge. For the first time in many years, she sat down at a piano. Everyone waited silently, expecting nothing more than a clumsy attempt. But Amina felt something stir inside her, something she had locked away for a long time. And in that quiet, breathless moment, even she did not know what was about to happen next. Amina sat on the piano bench with her hands resting quietly on her lap. The room felt warmer than before, though she wasn't sure if it was the lights or the heat rising inside her chest. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the trembling in her fingers. It had been so long since she had sat at an instrument like this. She almost felt like she had stepped into someone else's life. Behind her, the students whispered to each other. A few laughed softly, not in a cruel way, but with the kind of amusement people have when they are sure something unusual is about to happen. The instructors stood near the front, arms crossed, eyes filled with polite curiosity. They still thought this was a harmless moment that would be forgotten by tomorrow. Saeed stood a little to the side, watching her with concern. He had never seen her sit at a piano before. He had no idea what she could or could not do. His face showed disbelief mixed with hope. He didn't expect magic. He just hoped she wouldn't embarrass herself in front of all these people. Amina placed her fingers gently on the keys. The cool surface felt familiar in a way that surprised her. She could almost hear her younger self whispering from somewhere deep in her memory, reminding her how it once felt to breathe music instead of air. She pressed a single key. A soft note rose into the room. The sound was simple, but it echoed far more loudly inside her heart. It unlocked something she had buried for so many years. She closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment of stillness. When she opened them again, she felt slightly different, as if she had stepped back into a life she thought she had left behind forever. The piece Saeed had been assigned was not too difficult, at least not for someone with trained hands. But Amina wasn't sure if she could still play the way she once did. She wasn't even sure her fingers would remember how to move with grace. Still, she took a steady breath and began. At first, the notes were gentle, almost hesitant. Then her fingers found their rhythm, and the melody began to form. The simple, familiar movements started flowing more naturally, like a language she thought she had forgotten but somehow still understood. The room grew quiet. The students stopped whispering. The instructors leaned in slightly, their expressions shifting from amused interest to focused attention. Amina did not look at anyone. She kept her eyes on the keys, letting her hands guide her. Her body relaxed as the music carried her along. Memories flickered through her mind, past rooms, past pianos, past dreams she had once chased. She felt the old passion blooming again, warm and bright, like a fire reigniting. She played the piece with a softness that made it feel alive. Her fingers curved just the way they used to. Her movements were calm and steady, filled with emotion she didn't realize she still carried inside her. Saeed stared in disbelief. He had known his wife for years, yet he had never seen this side of her. It felt like watching someone he loved become a stranger and a miracle at the same time. The instructors exchanged glances. One of them stepped a little closer, narrowing his eyes as if trying to confirm what he was seeing. This was no beginner fumbling with notes. This was someone who knew how to shape a melody, how to bring life into sound. As Amina reached the final part of the piece, her movements grew more confident. Her fingers danced over the keys, not with showiness, but with a quiet skill that commanded respect. She let the final notes linger in the air before slowly lifting her hands. The room stayed silent for a long moment. Then one of the instructors spoke, his voice lower than before. "How long have you been playing?" Amina blinked, unsure how to respond. She had forgotten she wasn't alone. She gently pushed the bench back and stood up. She felt oddly exposed, like she had revealed a secret without meaning to. "It's been many years," she said softly. Another instructor stepped forward. "Years?" he repeated. "You played like someone who has trained seriously. That's not the touch of a casual learner." A few students nodded, still speechless. Some looked at her with admiration, others with confusion. Amina felt her cheeks warm. She didn't know what to say. She had never wanted attention. Saeed slowly walked over to her. "You never told me you could play like that," he whispered. She looked down at her hands. "I didn't know if I still could," she answered honestly. One of the students finally spoke, breaking the silence completely. "That was beautiful," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. Several others nodded. The joking instructor, the one who had suggested she play, looked more surprised than anyone. He wasn't laughing now. Instead, he looked thoughtful, as if he was trying to understand what had just happened. Amina stepped away from the piano and returned to Saeed's side. Her heart was still beating quickly, not out of fear, but out of the strange rush that always came after playing. She had forgotten what that felt like. "Can you play something else?" one student asked. Amina froze again. She wasn't sure what to do. She didn't want to draw more attention to herself. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She had only wanted to help her husband. But before she could answer, one of the instructors raised his hand gently. "Let her breathe," he said. "We have all had a surprise today." The room softened after that. The whispers started again, but they were different now, filled with wonder, not amusement. Amina walked back toward her usual seat near the window. But she didn't sit immediately. She felt different standing there, as if she were seeing the room through new eyes. It was strange how a single moment could change everything. She finally sat down and folded her hands together. She didn't open her knitting bag or her book. She just sat quietly, trying to process what had happened. Saeed sat beside her, still trying to come to terms with what he had seen. "How long have you been hiding this?" he asked with a gentle smile. She shook her head. "I wasn't hiding it. I just thought that part of my life was over." He looked at her with a mixture of admiration and sadness. "You played like you were meant for it, like you belonged there." Amina didn't know how to respond. She felt overwhelmed, touched, unsure, and strangely hopeful all at once. The instructors returned to their discussion about schedules and assessments, but now their occasional glances drifted toward Amina. She felt their interest, though she wasn't sure what it meant. After a while, one of them approached her. He was the oldest among them, known for his calm and thoughtful nature. He spoke softly so the others wouldn't overhear. "You have a gift," he said, "a rare one. May I ask why you left music?" Amina hesitated. She looked at her hands again, as if her fingers could explain it better than her words. "Life became busy," she said after a moment, "and I had responsibilities. There was no space for it anymore." The instructor nodded slowly, not pushing her for more details. "Sometimes life takes us away from the things we love," he said, "but sometimes life brings them back when we least expect it." Amina listened quietly, unsure of how to respond. "If you ever wish to return to music," he added gently, "you would be welcome here." Her breath caught for a moment. She hadn't expected anything like that. She didn't know if she was ready for such a thought. The idea of returning to music felt both frightening and comforting. When the day finally ended, Amina and Saeed walked out of the building together. The evening air was cool, and the sky was beginning to shift into soft colors. They walked in silence for a few minutes before Saeed spoke. "You changed everything today," he said quietly. Amina smiled a little, her eyes lowered. "I didn't mean to." "Maybe not," Saeed said, "but maybe it was time." Amina didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if this moment was just a brief spark or the beginning of something new. All she knew was that playing again had awakened something inside her, something she thought had died, but had only been sleeping. And now, she wasn't sure if she could put it back to sleep again. Amina felt different when she walked back into the conservatory the next week. She didn't dress differently. She didn't walk any faster or slower. She didn't hold her chin higher. But there was something in the air, something she couldn't quite name. It was as if the building itself remembered what had happened, even if she tried not to think about it too much. Usually, when she and Saeed entered, no one paid much attention. Students would pass by, instructors would nod politely, and Amina would quietly go to her usual seat near the window. But today was not like every other day. A few students looked up when the couple walked in. Whispered conversations paused for a moment. Some students turned their heads toward Amina, watching her in a way she wasn't used to. Their expressions weren't mocking, nor were they overly excited. They were simply curious about the woman who had surprised an entire room the week before. Amina tried not to let it bother her. She kept her eyes soft, her steps quiet. She sat down in her familiar seat and set her bag on her lap. But she could feel the room's attention shifting, a quiet pull she couldn't escape. Saeed noticed too. He leaned toward her and whispered, "Don't worry. They're just surprised." She nodded, though she wasn't sure if that made her feel better or worse. She had never liked being the center of attention, not even when she was younger. She preferred living in the background, observing gently from a distance. Yet now, the background seemed to be pushing her forward. A few minutes later, one of the instructors approached her. He was younger than the others, full of energy and enthusiasm. He carried a stack of music sheets in his hands. "Good morning," he said warmly. Little lines around his eyes showed he was smiling, even before his lips curved. "We were hoping we could speak with you for a moment." Amina blinked. "Me? Yes, you," he said with a small laugh. "If you're comfortable, of course." He gestured toward the main classroom. "We would like your help with something." Amina looked at Saeed, unsure of what to do. Saeed gave her a gentle smile, encouraging her. She stood slowly and followed the instructor into the main room. Inside, the other instructors were already gathered. The large piano sat in the center, its glossy surface reflecting the morning light. "We've been discussing your performance from last week," the oldest instructor began. "It left quite an impression on all of us." Amina clasped her hands together. "I didn't mean to draw any attention. I was just helping my husband, of course," the oldest instructor said kindly. "But sometimes life reveals a gift at the most unexpected moment. We want to understand your background a little better." Not out of pressure, simply out of interest. Amina didn't know what to say. She didn't want to share too much. Her past was still a place filled with heavy memories, and speaking about it felt like carrying something she had buried under the earth long ago. "I learned when I was younger," she said quietly. "I practiced a lot back then, but I stopped many years ago." Another instructor stepped forward. "If you don't mind," he said gently, "would you play something again? Anything you like. Just a short piece." Amina's breath caught. She looked at the piano, the same one she had played on last week. Her heart fluttered in a nervous rhythm. She wasn't sure she wanted to play again in front of so many eyes, but she also felt something inside her, something soft, something warm urging her to sit down. "Only if you're comfortable," the instructor repeated. Amina hesitated but eventually nodded. She walked to the bench and sat down. The room fell silent, even though only a few people were present. The quietness settled over her like a gentle blanket. She placed her hands on the keys. A memory drifted into her mind, a small piece she had learned as a young girl. Something delicate and light. A melody she used to play on quiet afternoons. She began. The simple melody floated into the room like a soft breeze. The notes were clean and steady, yet full of a quiet emotion that made the instructor stand still. Her fingers moved almost effortlessly, as if they remembered everything she had forgotten. It wasn't a dramatic piece. It wasn't a showy performance. It was gentle and honest, carrying years of silence and rediscovered warmth. When she finished, the instructors exchanged meaningful looks. "You have something special," one of them said softly. Amina lowered her eyes. "I only played something small. Even small pieces reveal truth," the instructor replied. The oldest instructor stepped closer. "We have a suggestion," he said. "We wondered if you would consider joining a special class here. Just once a week. No pressure, no large commitment, just a chance for you to reconnect with music." Amina's breath caught again. She felt a wave of emotions: fear, excitement, confusion. She hadn't sat in a classroom as a student in many years. She wasn't sure she belonged there anymore. "You don't have to decide now," the instructor added kindly. "Just think about it." Amina nodded slowly. The idea lingered in her mind like an echo she couldn't ignore. When she stepped out of the room, a few students were waiting nearby. They looked at her as if she were someone new. A girl with a notebook approached her shyly. "Excuse me," the girl said softly. "Can I ask, how long did you train?" Amina smiled gently. A long time ago, you play beautifully, the girl said. I hope you keep going. Amina felt touched by the sincerity in the girl's voice. She thanked her and slowly walked back to her seat near the window. Saeed watched her approach. How was it? She sat down, exhaling softly. They want me to join a class. Saeed's eyes widened slightly. A class. A small one. Only once a week. She paused. I don't know if I should. Saeed reached for her hand. You should do what feels right to you, not what others expect. Amina pressed her lips together, thinking deeply. She appreciated his support more than she could express. But even with his encouragement, she felt stuck between two worlds: the quiet life she knew, and the musical world she left behind. Hours passed. Saeed finished his lesson, and they walked home together. Amina remained unusually quiet. Her mind wandered through memories she had kept hidden for so long. She remembered her old teacher, a strict but kind man who saw potential in her when she was little. He used to say, "Music is not in the fingers, it is in the heart. The fingers only follow." She remembered practicing late into the evenings, her mother telling her to take breaks, her small hands aching but filled with determination. She remembered the competitions she once dreamed of entering. She remembered the early mornings, the long practices, the laughter with her teacher, and the pride she felt when she played well. Then she remembered the day everything changed, the day her mother fell ill. She had left music to take care of her family, and slowly, the dream faded. The piano keys gathered dust, and her life moved in a different direction. As she walked beside Saeed, these memories swirled inside her. She felt a strange mixture of sadness and comfort. Music had once given her purpose, and letting go of it had been one of the hardest things she had ever done. Now here she was, years later, being gently invited back into that world. When they reached home, Saeed made tea while Amina stood near the window, looking outside. The evening light painted soft colors across the sky. She wondered what her life might look like if she accepted the offer. Saeed finally joined her with 2 cups of tea. He handed her one and said, "You don't have to decide today. Just think about it." Amina nodded slowly. "I'm afraid I won't be good enough anymore." "You were incredible today," Saeed said. "And last week too." "That doesn't disappear." She looked down at her cup, watching the steam rise. "What if I disappoint them?" Saeed shook his head gently. "You won't, but even if you do, that's okay. You're not doing it for them. You're doing it for yourself." He paused. "Or you're not doing it at all. It's your choice." Amina felt a small, warm smile form on her lips. She appreciated his honesty and support. She took a sip of tea and let the warmth soothe her. That night, she couldn't sleep easily. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft sounds of the city outside. Her mind replayed the moments at the conservatory, the silence in the room when she played, the looks on the instructors' faces, the encouragement in their voices. She thought about the girl who told her she played beautifully. She thought about the feeling she had when her fingers touched the keys again, the warmth that spread through her chest. It was a feeling she hadn't known in years. Slowly, the idea of returning to music didn't seem as frightening as before. It felt more like a gentle invitation, soft, patient, waiting for her to open a door she had once closed. When morning came, she finally made her decision. She wasn't sure what the future would bring. She wasn't sure if she would succeed or fail, but she felt ready to take a small step, a step back toward the life she once loved, a step toward music again. The sun had barely risen when the quiet street outside the conservatory began to wake up, but inside the building, the morning felt heavy. She stood in the hallway again, her fingers lightly touching the wall as she walked. It was the same path she had taken the day before, but something in her chest felt different. The echoes of her last performance still lived in her mind, like a soft bell that refused to stop ringing. She didn't understand how her life had suddenly shifted. For years she lived simply, gently, without drawing attention. Now she was racing between rooms full of young musicians, instructors, and pianos polished so brightly they almost hurt her eyes. Every step made her feel like she did not belong. The morning after the storm in the mansion felt strangely soft, as if the night before had taken away some heavy weight that no one had dared to speak about. The air was calm, the hallways quiet, and even the light coming through the tall windows seemed gentler. It was the kind of morning that made people stop for a moment and feel things they had been avoiding. She woke up early, even before the kitchen staff turned on the first set of lights. She sat up slowly, still feeling the echo of the previous night's performance in her chest. She had never played with so much emotion in front of others. The music was still inside her, like a warm fire that refused to go out. She washed her face, tied her hair back neatly, and stood for a moment in front of the small mirror above her dresser. For once, she did not look unsure. She looked calm. She looked like someone who had found her voice. When she walked into the hallway, one of the older maids gave her a long look, not the sharp, doubtful one from before, but a softer, almost proud look. The maid didn't say anything. She just nodded, and that small gesture felt more meaningful than a whole speech. She walked toward the dining room to start her usual tasks, but halfway there she heard a low hum. It took her a moment to recognize that it was coming from the main music room. She hesitated, unsure if she should go near the place where everything had happened last night. But something pulled her toward the sound. She stepped inside quietly. The room was empty except for the tall windows filled with morning light and the grand piano, sitting like a giant memory in the center. The man who owned the mansion stood next to it, gently running his fingers along the edge of the polished wood. He looked lost in thought, almost troubled. She froze at the doorway, worried that she had stepped in at the wrong moment. But before she could leave, he looked up. "You're awake early," he said softly. She nodded. "I'd came to start the morning work." He took a slow breath. "I listened to recordings of last night. Everyone's talking about it." Her heart skipped. "I'm sorry if it caused any trouble." He shook his head immediately. "Trouble? No, what you did last night. People still don't have the right words for it." She didn't know how to respond, so she simply stood still. The man walked closer to the piano and opened the shiny lid. "Play something," he said. She blinked. "Right now?" "Yes, anything you want." It felt strange. This room had been filled with so many people last night, faces watching her, judging her, then falling silent. Now it was just the two of them. She walked forward slowly, touched the smooth keys, and let her fingers hover for a moment. Then she played a simple tune, one her mother used to hum while cleaning at home. It wasn't grand or complicated. It was gentle, warm, full of memories. Something about it made the room feel like a small world of its own. When she finished and lifted her hands, she didn't look up right away. She wasn't sure what expression she would see on his face. "I didn't know music like that existed," he finally said. "It's just something from home," she replied quietly. He nodded. "You've lived with a talent that people spend their whole lives searching for, and you've been hiding it behind chores and schedules and other people's expectations." She looked down. "I wasn't hiding it, I just didn't think anyone would care." He stepped a little closer. Last night proved otherwise. Before she could answer, they both heard footsteps in the hall. One of the mansion's event organizers appeared at the door, holding a tablet and looking anxious. "Sir, the calls haven't stopped," the organizer said. "People want interviews, guest appearances, performances, recordings, everything. They want her." The room suddenly felt too bright. She stepped back from the piano slightly, her breath catching. "I didn't ask for that," she whispered. The man looked at her carefully. "And you don't have to accept anything you don't want." But the organizer interrupted, excitement rushing into his voice. "Sir, this could become national news. What she did last night, it's already everywhere. People are calling her a miracle player." She felt her chest tighten. She wasn't ready for fame or cameras or crowds. She had never even performed for more than a handful of people before last night. The thought of strangers analyzing her made her feel small again. "I don't know if I can do all that," she said in a low voice. He dismissed the organizer with a single glance. The organizer nodded, stepped out, and closed the door. Silence filled the room again. "Look at me," the man said gently. She lifted her eyes. "You don't owe the world anything," he said. "You don't have to jump into fame just because it appears at your door. You choose what happens next." "Then what should I choose?" she asked. "That's something only you can decide," he replied. "But I want you to know this: what happened last night wasn't an accident. It was who you truly are." His words hit her deeply. She felt a strange mix of fear and courage rising inside her. Before she could reply, another maid came to the doorway. "They're waiting for her in the dining room," the maid said softly. She nodded and left the room slowly. All through breakfast, people whispered. Some looked at her with respect they had never shown before. Others looked confused, almost unsure of how to treat her now. The staff avoided staring, but kept giving her small smiles. Even the guests who had laughed at her before seemed awkward, unable to meet her eyes. After breakfast, she stepped outside into the garden to clear her mind. The air was cool, and the trees moved gently in the wind. She sat on a stone bench and let the silence calm her. She had spent her whole life believing that people like her were meant to stay in the background, to work quietly without being seen. Music had always been her escape, not something she believed could change her future. Now everything felt uncertain. She heard footsteps behind her and turned. It was the man again. "May I sit?" he asked. She nodded. He sat beside her, leaving enough space for comfort. "You handled last night with more grace than most trained performers would have," he said. "Even now, you're calm when most people would panic." "I don't feel calm," she admitted. He smiled lightly. "That's what makes it real." For a moment, they just sat in silence. "If you want," he said softly, "I can help you learn how to navigate all this. Not as your employer, as someone who understands what it means when life changes overnight." She looked at him, unsure. "You've carried your gift alone for too long," he added. She took a slow breath. "I'm scared." "So am I," he said quietly. "But that doesn't mean we stop." She didn't know why, but hearing him say that made her feel less alone. He stood up slowly. "Take your time. Think. Whatever choice you make, I'll support it." When he walked away, she looked down at her hands. They were steady now. For the first time, she felt like her life was opening, not in a loud, rushed way, but gently, like a door she had the courage to push on. She wasn't sure where the path ahead would lead, but she knew one thing. Her story was no longer something she kept hidden inside her, and maybe, just maybe, she was ready to let the world hear it. She stepped onto the stage the night before the showcase for the final rehearsal, but nothing felt right. The hall was too big, the silence too heavy, and every sound she created seemed to disappear before it reached the empty seats. She tried to shake it off, but her hands felt stiff each time she touched the keys. It was as if the pressure had wrapped itself around her fingers. The instructor sat in the middle row, watching quietly. They didn't speak much, but their presence alone made her nervous. She tried to play the opening lines, but the music didn't flow. It felt sharp, uneven, almost cold. One instructor stood and walked toward the stage. "You're thinking too much," he said. "You're trying to perform. That's not what you do. You express. Go back to that." She nodded, though she wasn't sure she could. She tried again, but the same tightness followed. When she finally stopped, she could feel her throat closing. "I don't know what's wrong with me," she whispered. "Nothing is wrong," the instructor said softly. "You're afraid. That's normal. But fear has no place in your music." She didn't answer. She just stared at the piano, feeling small and overwhelmed. Her husband waited for her outside the hall. When she walked out, he instantly noticed the worry in her eyes. "You're still scared?" he asked. She nodded. "I don't know what will happen tomorrow. I don't want to embarrass myself." "You won't," he said gently. "I've heard you play when no one was watching. That's the version of you the world needs to hear." She leaned her head on his shoulder as they walked home. The night air felt cool, but her mind was warm with thoughts that wouldn't settle. The next morning, she arrived at the conservatory early again. This time, she avoided the big hall. She went to her favorite practice room, the quiet one with a small window and soft light. She sat at the piano and closed her eyes. She didn't try to play the piece she was supposed to perform. Instead, she let her fingers wander. The music that came out wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished, but it was honest. She breathed deeply. For a moment, she remembered why she ever touched a piano in the first place. It wasn't to impress anyone. It wasn't to win anything. It was to feel something. When the instructors came in later to check on her, they paused in the doorway. She didn't see them at first, and her music filled the room like a quiet confession. When she finally noticed their presence, she stopped, embarrassed. "Don't stop," one instructor said. "This is the version of you we want on stage." Her heart eased a little. That afternoon, the conservatory was buzzing. Staff walked quickly. She stood there backstage, her hands still warm from the piano keys, her heart still beating with leftover emotion from what she had just shared. The sound of applause still echoed faintly through the hall, even though the curtains had closed. It didn't feel real yet. She wasn't used to being the center of anything. She wasn't used to people looking at her with admiration. For most of her life, she had stayed in the background, quietly doing what needed to be done without expecting anything in return. But now, people had stood for her. People had clapped for her. People had felt her. She didn't rush to leave the backstage area. Instead, she took a moment to breathe, placing a hand over her chest to feel the rhythm that had slowed into something calm and steady. It was strange to think how frightened she had been just an hour ago. That same fear had almost kept her from walking onto the stage at all. Yet here she was, standing in the aftermath of something she never thought she would experience. Her husband appeared beside her, out of breath as if he had run across the entire hall just to reach her. His eyes were shining with pride and relief. He didn't speak immediately, he simply pulled her gently into a warm embrace, holding her as if he wanted her to feel every bit of support he carried in his heart. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. "I knew you could do it. I knew it the moment you touched that piano at home." She shook her head slightly, her voice trembling. I didn't know. I wasn't sure of anything." "You don't have to be sure," he said. "Sometimes being brave is enough." His words settled into her like a warm blanket. She smiled faintly, though emotion tugged at her eyes. A moment later, one of the younger instructors approached her quietly. He seemed almost nervous to speak, which surprised her. In her mind, instructors were always confident, always sure of themselves, always composed. But this one approached her with a gentle awkwardness, as if afraid to intrude. "Excuse me," he said softly. "Your performance was very moving, truly. We don't often see something like that." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Would you be willing to speak with the director? She would like to meet you." Her breath caught. "The director?" She looked at her husband uncertainly, and he nodded encouragingly. So she followed the instructor down a quiet hallway, her footsteps light, her heart doing a soft, nervous flutter. The director was waiting near the entrance of her office, a calm, graceful woman with thoughtful eyes. She wasn't smiling widely or clapping or making a big show of appreciation. Instead, she wore a gentle expression that made the woman feel seen, really seen. "Your performance," the director said, "was remarkable. Not because it was perfectly technical, but because it was honest. Music like that stays with people." The words felt unreal, like something she might have dreamed. The director continued, "I've seen countless students, professionals, performers. Many of them follow rules, patterns, and routines, but very few play from a place of truth." She paused. "You have that." Her throat tightened. "I have never trained properly. I've only played at home. Sometimes training helps shape skill," the director said, "but heart is something no school can teach. And you carried heart in every note." She lowered her eyes, overwhelmed. She didn't know what to say. The director offered a small, thoughtful smile. "I would like to invite you to join a special program we offer. It's for individuals who show natural musical ability, regardless of background. You wouldn't have to commit to anything immediately. Just think about it. You have something rare, and I believe it deserves a place to grow." She stared at the director, stunned. A program, a place to learn, a chance to explore something she had only dreamed of quietly in her own kitchen or living room. She nodded slowly. "Thank you, I'll think about it." The director gently touched her arm. "Take your time. No pressure. The path is yours to choose." As the woman walked back toward the hall, her husband was waiting right where she had left him. She didn't need to explain much. He could see everything in her eyes. "She wants me to join a program," she whispered. His eyebrows lifted with pure joy. "Then we'll think about it together. Whatever you choose, I'm with you." The audience had begun to leave the building, but many people stopped to speak with her as they passed. Some offered warm smiles, others shared brief words about how her music had touched them. One elderly woman held her hand for a moment and said, "I felt like I was listening to someone's soul." Those words stayed with her long after the woman had walked away. Eventually, she stepped outside. The evening air was cool, brushing softly across her face. The night sky above the conservatory was unusually clear, dotted with quiet stars that glittered softly. She took in the moment, the space, the quiet. Her husband slipped his hand into hers. "How do you feel?" She thought for a long moment before answering. "Lighter," she said, "like I finally let something out that I didn't know I was holding inside." He smiled gently. "You deserve that." They walked slowly toward the parking area, but she paused halfway, turning back to look at the conservatory building. Its tall windows glowed with warm light. It seemed different now, not intimidating, not distant but welcoming, like a place that had opened its doors to her in a way she never expected. "Do you want to come back?" he asked softly. She took a deep breath. "I think I do. Not because of the applause, but because I want to know how far this feeling can go. I want to see what else I can do." He squeezed her hand. "Then that's exactly what we'll do." They drove home slowly, talking quietly about the evening, replaying moments, sharing little thoughts that had been too overwhelming to express earlier. The night wasn't loud or celebratory. It was calm, gentle, filled with a warmth that made everything feel real. When they arrived home, she walked straight to the living room where her small upright piano stood waiting in its usual corner. She sat down, lifted the fallboard, and placed her fingers on the keys. She didn't play anything dramatic. She didn't try to recreate the performance. She simply pressed a few quiet notes, letting the sound drift softly through the room. It felt different now, not because the piano had changed, but because she had. Her husband stood behind her, resting a hand on her shoulder. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. His presence was enough. She closed her eyes. She played. Not for the conservatory, not for the instructors, not for the crowd. She played for herself, and in that moment, she understood something clearly. The stage had not been the end of her journey. It was the beginning, and she was ready for whatever came next.